I think I've done kind of a disservice talking about different kinds of Spey cast without talking about the design of the line. So the reason skagit heads are so easy to cast is because they have all that mass in the butt of them, and you can fill them, load the rod, and they're easy to cast. And then you get into your Scandis, and I like a Scandi the same way, like a Steve Godshell Scandi shooting head that he makes. They're all blunt at the end, and that's what I like. I don't like a long tail. Here's a Rage. This is that old school Rage. They might have redesigned it. See, it's got a lot of mass in this butt, and then within a foot, it's getting a lot bigger, and then it continues to be like a skagit line. So these older ones, at least, were really easy loading and really easy and fun to cast, especially if you underline them and make a Scandi line out of them, as opposed to lining them like a skagit head, which they're gross, I think, if you do that. Personal preference. This is a Boss line. This has got a pretty little, narrow rear taper. And part of the reason is so this loop won't be too big and fat, but then it quickly goes into a heavier rear taper. So like within a foot, it's nice and girthy. It's nice and girthy, and so you'll feel the load on that. With Scandi lines, I really like the blunt end. A lot of the Scandi lines they make these days, for whatever reason, they have, a long back taper, which I don't get because you have to bring that long back taper into your tip top and maybe your second or third guide to get the heavy part next to your rod tip. So for beginners, they'll get a Scandi line and they'll try it without understanding the back taper issue, and they won't even be able to cast it. And I really don't get it, because when I get a Scandi line like that, I clip that long back taper off and I loop the fat end. And then if I want to, I can use as much overhang as I want. And they still fly pretty good. I do alter my lines often if one isn't just on the money for the grains and the taper that I want. So this is a Boss long, and I wanted it for my 14-foot Bruce and Walker Norway, but it was a little too heavy, but the Boss mid was a little shorter. I wanted something that I could keep my long line technique, and so I basically took some of the back off this, made it a few feet shorter, and then I welded a loop on the end. So this is how I like them to be. Just fat, and then a loop. Got a loop, welded it on. Now it's fat. It's like a Godshell shooting head. So with this, I can use any amount of overhang I want. Loads the rod good, and I've got a little bit shorter. And the reason I shortened it was because it was just a little too heavy. And the next one down was a little too tight, or too light. So I shortened it for a 14-foot rod. And these load really, really good. You can do this with any fly line. I like to use these. I've got an Airflow Delta running line off a 7-weight Delta, Airflow Delta. Took the running line, and it's made of a different material than the PVC, so it welds really good. You get some shrink tape or shrink tube and hair straightener. Welds really nice, it's good and strong. Super fun little project. So that's how I like my rear tapers to be. So if it's a Scandi line and it has that much rear taper, most of it's gonna come off. So I got a blunt end that loads the rod. So the Boss line is made for You know, the boss, the bridge, and the next cast, and of course some of the gill force, they're made by competition spey casters, and they're kind of made to cast like a competition spey line that's kind of mellowed out a little bit. So with a big girthy rear end on them, you can still use some overhang, and you can still fill the rod load really good. To be sure, these are all fishing lines. The ones designed with a little more mass in the rear end and kind of like a comp line, they're for casting long distances on big rivers, but they can be fished at shorter distances as well. So with a lot of the casting that I've talked about, it's with lines that have a short rear taper and are really easy to cast. But one of the things I've neglected is to talk more about some of the fishing lines. So a fishing line that's casting is secondary. They're designed for fishing, which means you can cast with just a little bit of the head out, or half the head out, or 3/4 of the head out, and they're still going to cast good with good turnover at all ranges. But they still have, some of them, a long rear taper. Some of the gale force equalizer lines have a long rear taper, and they're designed with fishing in mind. They're not exclusively made to just bomb casts with. A great example is the gale force, I think it's called the Touchdown Clearwater Special. It was made with Poppy in mind, I believe. His picture's on the front of it. And so Poppy, he likes to fish with all his, he thinks of them as a fishing line and not just a line for bombing casts. So you might only have half the head out a lot of times, or 2/3 of it, and you still have a line that you don't have to shoot. And the beauty of the long lines really is that if they're good and long, you don't have to do any stripping if you don't want to. So that can be a real advantage. But I've never really talked about, there's kind of two different ways I like to cast them. So with the ones with the big heavy mass in the ass, you can do a linear cast style and get away with it, and it'll work just great. So in other words, you can lift your line for a single spey and then pitch it back in a straight line, make a V-loop or whatever you want, and wait for them to land, pitch them, circle up, wait, cast them. And they just do great with that. They just bomb. It's very satisfying for a lot of us. But with the fishing lines, they're made with the idea that it's more satisfying to catch fish and have a tool that you can use at any length or at distance and still have it perform well. So sometimes when people try the different lines and it requires a different casting stroke, it's easy to think that the line isn't any good, when in reality it's just it's made for a different reason. It's made to be, stable in flight, fish all lengths of it, but it can require a different casting method than just what we might call the linear, which is when you can pitch it backwards, get a V-loop, cast it with some pausing with these more fishing lines. Sometimes it works best to go all Albur and do a continuous motion cast and keep the rod moving and bring it in flat, get that nice anchor, and just immediately go into the cast. It's not a matter of pausing and waiting. It's more of a matter of keeping the rod moving keeping the line really tensioned up and doing things a little more blended together. So that requires more continuous motion for me. Or sometimes I have better luck if I'll play with a continuous motion aspect, bring it in firm, really smoke it in, and then get it up and around and out